welcome to another episode of Tech Time Today. I am your host, Jeff Welpley, and I have a special guest with me, Sander Ellis. Sander, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Sander Elias. I'm an Angular GDE and I'm a long-time developer. I'm developing for over 4 decades now, 4.5 decades actually. I'm starting with web applications in the 90s, the early 90s, not the late 90s.
And I've known Sander for a long time. We've both been GDEs. We worked on a couple collaborative efforts before in the past. Super knowledgeable guy, and it was this episode is talking about CSS architecture, some of the cutting edge stuff, some of the concepts of best ways to implement UI styles and that type of thing. And it's one of these things that I don't know if you are a web developer and not coming from a design background, this is almost certainly something that you've struggled with as well in the past, because we focus on some of the programmatic algorithmic details as a web developer and kind of how things look and whatever else. It's always like, throw something ugly up there and somebody else does that or whatever. So when you have to get into the details of it, it can be like really, really hard, right, Sandra?
It can be, but at the same time, if you are a web developer, that means you are going to run in a browser and you should know your tools. And the browser is one of your tools, and it doesn't only provide you with JavaScript and TypeScript. It also provides you with CSS and HTML, and somehow people seem to forget those things exist and throw everything in the div.
Well, that's true, but back in the day, so this is 2000s, early 2000s or whatever, JavaScript, which is like the thing that you and I focus on and really feel passionate about, the patterns and some of the nitty gritty details of JavaScript coding. But back in the day, it was similar to what we're talking about with CSS now. It was just like throw whatever junk in there, like in the jQuery days of like people, focused on the server side coding, and anything on the client side for JavaScript code, they didn't care how ugly it was and how mangled or whatever else. And I feel like we've not in all cases, but a lot of that is not necessarily today. People take it much, much more seriously, but you still see that same type of thing with CSS. You know what I mean?
I see still the same thing with HTML also. It's kind of a problem because in a lot of projects, you see we have like 10 backend developers and 1 frontender. And actually you are selling a program, you are selling an application, and your users are experiencing the application through your web interface. So that should be in order. So having like 4 times the backend developers compared to the front end, I think that's a conception.
Well, so when people run into this issue, or different web developers, I think view this differently. You obviously have a certain viewpoint, but I think that if you look over how people handle the styling and CSS side of things, you see several different types of approaches and patterns.
Yes.
Like, how would you break down the common ways? I'm not saying like we'll get to the ones that you prefer, but like just kind of give me a breakdown of the way that you see most web developers kind of like deviate into how they handle that side of things.
Well, what I see is that people start building stuff and don't look at how it looks at all. And then when they get some comments that it should be looking a little bit nicer, the first thing they look to is go online and look for a component library that fixes everything, which is never going to happen anyway. Because if you take any third party, you will also take the responsibility to keep that up to date in your project. And if there are bugs in there, you need to inform the third party, hey, there is a bug in here, and you're blocked until it's fixed in the third party, or you need to make a workaround until it is fixed. And I quite often see that those workarounds never get removed anyway, even if the bug is fixed, which doesn't help the code quality, neither the CSS, neither the HTML, nor the JavaScript. It just stays there forever because nobody cares, or they do care, but they are afraid that if they take it away, they will break something. which wouldn't happen if you have ample tests. But I will get off my high horse here and try to give some more practical examples.
Well, it feels like in the most extreme case, you have frameworks where the UI component side of it sort of dominates everything, where you have to like literally in your HTML is just the entire thing is this component framework library. So like, for example, if you're using Ionic, if you're using kind of material design, I think has the same thing with like MD hyphen
Bootstrap. There are a lot of those things, and basically you are talking that language for your UI, and that is a big buy-in. That actually means if you want to change something in the future, you end up replacing all of your UI code, which is basically a full rewrite. So if you want a simple design change, that is going to be very, very hard to implement because you have to do a boatload of CSS tricks to make another framework look the way you want, or you have to rewrite parts of that thing. And if that's a third party, that is really difficult to do. Also, you cannot do it upstream because the people that are deploying this thing like what they are building, I think. Otherwise, they would have changed it already. So you are basically on yourself anyway if you want to have any changes in how your UI is looking. And no matter what framework you pick, that is material design from the Angular team has its own look and feel. Bootstrap has its own look and feel, and there are many that have their own look and feel. There are a few frameworks that claim to say, hey, we have no UI or no design style from ourselves. We are just providing the logic. Those are a little bit better, but still you buying into their way of working. And that might not fit the way you want your build your application. For example, you can have a grid component that takes its data in a certain form, which is fine. It makes sense if you build a grid. But the format the data is in might be something completely different where your own data is in. That means to use this grid, you have to transform your own data into a format that your grid component is going to understand. And you end up with a lot of glue code, which is in the end might be more work than writing the thing yourself in the first place.
Yeah, you end up create your own kind of wrappers around their wrappers around. There's like multiple layers there that can
You
get
get wrappers.
crazy.
So you get wrappers for wrappers, and you are writing utilities to convert your data format to their data format, and then you need to add something like, okay, but now we need some sorting for or something different, and you end up doing all of this like 3 or 4 times to get it right. It's not nice programming. It's not a nice place to be in because it's never working the way you think, and you need to. It's basically throwing things at the wall until it sticks, which is not the way I like to work. We can work like that. We all have done this, but that is not what you want to do.
I agree with what you're saying that like on the extreme of the heavy-handed side of things of like it kind of overtaking everything, that's just like too much. And I agree with all the stuff you're bringing up, but like playing devil's advocate on like why the full other extreme, and I also think you would agree with this on the full other extreme of like doing everything like zero other libraries, frameworks, and like just raw like JavaScript, CSS, HTML without like anything else is something that like is hugely difficult to do. I mean, you and I are both from the Angular world. Like we obviously believe in using some level of abstractions or whatever else. So the key, it seems like, is okay, neither of those two extremes are good. Where in the middle, like how do you find that place in the middle that makes the most sense when it comes to UI and styles and CSS?
If I'm building applications for myself, I use a tool that is called OpenProps, which is subatomic CSS variables, which is a very low level way of formatting stuff, but that gives you a lot of power. And that comes with a tool that is called Normalize, which basically sets up the HTML formatting in a basic way so that your basics are in order, your fonts are in order, the dimensions are correct. And this is built by a proper designer, so everything is as a designer would do it without me designing a single thing. I can add some colors, I can add some I can add the features, but I don't have to make all of the styling. And there are multiple CSS frameworks that do all of the styling, which even gives you complete components like a card or a button or whatever. But there is no JavaScript involved. It is just CSS and a little bit of HTML. And that gives you a good way to start. The upside of this is at a certain point, if you think, oh, I don't like this formatting anymore, probably if you switch to a new CSS framework, you need to update some of the parts in your code, but it is just probably new class names on the existing HTML or a wrapper more or less. But that is actually not a full rewrite. If you are going for a normal component library, if you want to really update your UI, it is a full rewrite. If you're using CSS, and if you have a pure CSS framework, you can even just take the CSS of that framework and adapt it to what you want. Because modern CSS is very, very powerful, and you can basically upgrade whatever you have to what it needs to be.
Yeah, actually, so just on that last point, I did get solicited to take the state of CSS survey. And in going through that, I was actually like shocked by all this stuff that they were asking about that like I had never seen before. And then I started looking into it and I'm like, oh my God, they have made a ton of innovation in actual legit standard CSS that is now supported by all the browsers. It's like a lot of it's built into CSS itself, which is amazing.
Yeah, nesting CSS, all kinds of nice things are CSS. You can now do tooltips with pure CSS, and those tooltips are really nice, and you can format them the way you want. You can position in the way you want. If you have a tooltip and you go near the border, you can make it go to up, left, right, whatever you want, with only CSS. No JavaScript is needed. That is a huge deal because that means you can drop probably 2 or 3 libraries that you're using for this stuff now. You don't have to ship any code, and it works in every browser the same way.
I feel like it's the same thing with back in the day when JavaScript standards started getting the features that used to only be accessible through like jQuery or whatever. And then there came a point where it's like, why even bother using jQuery anymore? It's just all built into JavaScript itself. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that is true. All of the useful stuff for jQuery is now in JavaScript itself. I think most of it landed when Query Selector became a thing. But to be truthful, not all of the jQuery extensions landed in HTML, and I had a very much hate-love relationship with those things. I loved them because they made it easy to do some things, and I hated them because they were always buggy as hell and fickle. And well, the people that have used jQuery extension know what I'm talking about.
Getting back to open props though, because you mentioned that it's something that just I'm a newbie. I've not done extensive work with it, but in talking to you, I started looking into it. And the thing that I gathered conceptually, we're going to actually, I want to share some code that I started working on and get your feedback and whatever else. But before we do that, like just conceptually at a high level, the way that I see it, and tell me if I'm looking at this incorrectly, is that it's sort of like two things like in my mind. It's like someone just giving you some styles you can work with. So like a kind of like a preset, at the CSS level that you can kind of draw from and use.
It's basically an HTML reset that does set up HTML properly. But it is indeed not only that, it gives you CSS properties, so custom variables that you can just tweak.
Yeah, so that was the second thing is this concept of sharing properties, because I feel like until I started looking at this, that it's true that like I always think about like if I'm using some other CSS, what I'm using is a class that someone in their CSS has that I'm bringing in, and then I'm like using that class. And it just didn't occur to me that you can create the variables at the attribute level that is useful for creating some standards and that type of thing and sharing at that level, which can be very useful.
Yeah, that is very useful, and it enables you to do things like, okay, we have a brand color, and we have a primary color, and we have a secondary color, and you can set that during runtime if you want. You can say, hey, I want to have a new brand color, and you just do a set of a CSS variable, and your entire UI is updated. This makes theming and so much more easy. If you don't agree with any of the, I mentioned normalize. If you don't agree with any of the settings in there, you just change the CSS variables you want to change, and it's done. It's I can make a really, really long story about this, but it is basically just, oh, I don't like the left margins. They should be a little bit bigger. So you do something like, okay, dash dash left margin equals 1.5 rem, and done.
Yep.
It
Yeah.
is that
So
easy.
let's actually dive into some of the specifics. I'm going to share my screen and take a look at, and before I do this, just to be clear, like I am a newbie on this, so like I'm sure that I've done like a lot of stupid things in terms of like not
Oh,
using
that
open
is how we
props
learn.
and this type of yeah, exactly. So this is a learning thing for all of us. All
Yeah.
right, let me share my screen. Okay, so first, before I jump into my own code, I want to just highlight the open props website, which kind of goes over a little bit of how it works. And obviously, just like with a lot of this stuff, there's a getting started. There's a pretty good video. I've watched most of this, but like, why don't you just give us a quick idea of the getting started side of things, of the different options that are available for this sender?
Yeah, you can use. It is a CSS framework. They are using Post CSS, but you're not. That is like how they put it together. You can use it from a CDN if you like. So you just update your index.html, load it from the CDN. That is an option. I would not do that because there are a lot of reasons, but most of it is security. And if the CDN is down, that means your styling is down, which is a terrible experience for your users. So I'm usually using the npm option. Basically, you import what you're using, and in here they made a fairly coarse split of things. In the new version, the split will be a little bit more fine grained. So if you are not using the sizes, you don't import the sizes. You don't the individual imports. The last part there is if you only are using the indigo styling and the easings, you can import only those two, and you don't get the rest of open props.
So as a
So
matter of
that
approach, like when you're building with open props, you sort of wait until you need something and then you import it at
then
that
you
time. Is
import
that
it.
kind of fair
Yes,
to say? Yeah.
that
Okay.
is fair to say.
Okay.
Yeah. That is the way that you can do it. If you go with the open prop style and you use the normalize, and then you basically pull in most of the things, you can, and there is a way of just the light and dark themes. Everything is formatted for light and dark. So if the user preference is dark, they will get a dark version of your site. If you use this, if they set it to light, they get a light version of your site.
In
But
my example when I share my code, I did just import everything. So that's like number one. I'm writing down a bunch of notes of things that I have to do differently. And so one of them is kind of breaking things down a little more. And what you're saying makes a lot of sense. For JavaScript, is there JavaScript that you need to pull in
no,
as well for?
I've never used any of the JavaScript in there. I noticed it was there and I left it there. If you are using Figma for your designs, there are design tokens that you can import into Figma, so that the props names from open props are also available in your Figma design.
Okay. So you already mentioned not doing this at the top and
Yeah, I
splitting it
would do
out as
that. I
needed.
would leave the top three lines, but basically the lines below there are already in those top three.
Well, so these ones, this is where it comes down to. So there's stuff of open props, and then just like how you set up your own things. So these other ones are basically my own CSS files that like. So
Oh,
tell
these
me
are
how
your
you think
files.
you organize it. Yeah, yeah. So that's what I'm saying is that the way. Let's just look at sizes for a second. So the, I don't know if I'm doing this the right way or the quote unquote right way, but like I was thinking that, or actually no, positioning is maybe. Hold on, I was going to show you. Yeah, like maybe this is a good example of where like I don't know if the way I was thinking about it is like I create an attribute of like so for borders, borders what I'm calling border standards. So that's my name for a common type of border that I'm going to reuse a lot of places. And then I'm using these are the CSS props values that I'm using
Yes,
to set the some of the values. Is that how it should be, or like what do you think
yes,
about
this is
that?
a very good way of setting this up.
Okay.
And you can just use border standard. Um, are you aware why you're using rare HTML?
I have no idea. I cop- I copied that from something I saw, so I don't actually know. What can you explain that, please?
Yes. What this does is it gives this line a specificity. I can never speak that word, of 0, which means that if anywhere in your program you need to overclass this with a different version because you have one part of your application where you want your border standard to be a little bit more wide or a little bit more small or a little bit more red, whatever, you can just put a style on there with dash dash border standard, override it, and that part of your application will have a new border standard without questions asked, without fighting. Hey, but it is already set. Um, the new one will win because this has a specificity of 0, and
Okay, that makes
that is an
sense.
important thing to do. So you copied the good code.
Okay. So this is a good example, but maybe some of
Yeah.
the other stuff isn't. So I'm just going to go through a couple of the other ones. So so some of this stuff. So like again, I struggle with naming. I also struggle with like a bunch of other stuff. So this is not attributes. So like this is in my CSS, and the way I was thinking
No,
about it is that yes, in some
these
cases
are
I'm
actually
setting
utility
attributes.
class. This is something I would call a utility class, and you have a flex center.
Uh-huh.
Basically, you are using flex. Newsflash: you don't need flex for this anymore because you can now center on a normal block element.
Oh,
But
okay.
this same thing will work on a block. You don't need flex for this. Flex has a lot of upsides, but it has a couple of downsides too. You don't need the display flex here anymore. I'm not sure that landed in all browsers just yet. I would have to check, but I'm like 90% sure. I would do things like this where I have a couple of utility classes for things that I'm doing often, like centering something, or in your application you often have like a couple of repeated UI patterns, and if
Yes.
something is repeated like more than twice, it's okay, it's a reusable thing. It should have like a name like flex center, so you can reuse it everywhere, and you put it in your top styling so that it works everywhere without thinking.
This is one thing that I used in the past. I want to get your feedback on. So the basic idea, I start off with having an SVG of the icon, and then URL encode it. And I basically have it URL encoded in an attribute, and then I use it as a background image. So it's in these helper classes. So like, for example, the gear icon is in this background image, and then within when I actually display it, then I can add extra styles for like coloring it or sizing or whatever else.
Yeah,
Like, what are your thoughts on this way of doing icons?
this is a fine way of doing icons. It really depends on the number of icons you are having, and on the weight of the icons, because if your icons are really, really, really large, you might want to load them separately. Lazy. So,
That's fair. Yeah, you're actually absolutely right that is one huge downside that the inability to do lazy loading with this for sure. Yeah,
yeah.
I'm gonna.
Oh, you can lazy load CSS also, but for a couple of icons where it is not too big, this is fine.
Yeah.
Uh,
I'm just gonna if gets too big. Okay,
I would
that
say
is
take a look at the total size of your CSS file, your index, your CSS file you're shipping, if that is like bigger than 400 kilobytes, I would start looking. I would start looking a little bit earlier, but overall, if you look at an application, if you're shipping a megabyte or more of JavaScript, this small amount of CSS is not going to make the difference anyway.
Yeah. I will put in the description for this video some of these links that I did find useful. I mean, who knows where you can initially get an SVG for an icon from wherever, but there's some cool tools I found for, both modifying and optimizing SVGs for icons, as well as this URL encoder tool. So I'll put that
I
in
have
the
a nice link I will share with you later on that has an icon library where you can download your icon as a SVG or 3 or 4 different formats, which is and you can just use them from their site if you want, but you can also download them and include them like this or whatever way you like. You can download it as an SVG, you can download it as a PNG, you can download it as an ICO file. And I think they have like 200,000 icons or so on there. So there are a lot of icons.
Definitely send. I'm always looking for good icons.
I actually got this link from Adam. He was using it in one of his examples, and I was going like, "Oh, that's a nice thing to have." And it is open source icon data sets, Iconify design, nice. Which has very, very many icons in there, and very many icon sets even. So there usually is. And one of the icons I'm still looking for and never found a proper one is like a tumbleweed. But apparently I'm the only person that wants a tumbleweed icon.
Well, with one of the links I'll share, you can create your own icon. It makes it pretty simple. So maybe I'll create your tumbleweed for you and send it to you. Okay, so this is jumping into one of the Angular components. This is actually from my layout component, and I mean I could pick anything, but I wanted to kind of go over a little bit in here of the way. So we talked about you have your CSS files that have kind of the stuff that is common, both custom attributes that you're creating that you're using in different places, and some kind of like classes that you will be reused in different places. But this is in a specific component. So like at the component level, I think you'll agree that you do have your own styles at the component level, and you're using some of the common stuff. So like, for example, just to give a couple things. So I'm both using this flex column is one of the ones that I created in a common CSS file. But then I put everything in one Angular component here, both my HTML and CSS and JavaScript, just to make it more readable. But like then I'm also adding, some specific stuff.
Okay. I see what you're doing. If I'm building HTML, I will only rarely have a class name in there because I.
Oh, really? Okay.
I'm also, if I'm doing layout, I'm using things like we have things like header, we have things like main, and we have things like sidebar. Those are valid HTML elements. So,
well, again, this is one of those things that I haven't maybe kept up to date as much as I should have on Semantic HTML. So that's actually a good thing to. You're obviously, it's a lot of benefits to doing Semantic HTML. One thing I'll say is besides, well, I guess depending where you're coming from, there's a lot of different reasons. With styling, it obviously helps to target specific things. You could use less. It ends up being lighter, the overall weight of your page, because you have to use less things. But also for SEO purposes, like something that I am very concerned about, anything you could do to make it more understandable to tooling is actually a good thing, because you want the Google bot to actually understand your page very easily. So using Semantic HTML actually helps with that.
You can style using the area attributes, so you don't need a class name if you can use an area attribute for that. But in here, you're starting with a wrapping div. Mm-hmm. Why are you not using the host selector to just style the host? then you don't need this outer wrap.
That is actually an awesome tip. You're definitely right. Yeah, it's like an extra layer, that needless layer, which is not. It just
Yeah,
adds to the bloat
I don't
and
know how
makes it.
this component is called because that is just out of screen. But you are
Yeah,
now in your HTML, you have your component element, and inside that component element, you directly put a div that has no purpose. The only purpose
yeah.
is wrapping the thing that is already wrapped in your component.
Well, it's just you see, it's in a particular page, it's using this as the main layout that it's wrapping. So this is a specific page, the home page, and it uses this.
Another wrapper. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So you can eliminate one level of wrapping, for sure. Yes.
Yeah, then that is something that it's a pet peeve of me. I'm always complaining about those things. Don't use wrappers where you don't need wrappers, because it is just useless HTML that makes it harder to read and debug your application, and you're shipping more than you need to ship. The host
Well,
selector.
but going back to one important, so I agree with what you're saying there. But going back to one thing you said that I don't quite understand is you said not to use classes, because if you look back to how we're creating these common things, and I understand you're saying that you don't need flex or whatever in this case, so maybe this is a bad example, but just forget about that for a second and just assume that this is like some common style that we want to use in multiple places. If we're not using a class here, how am I
Well, if it's a common style
using
you're
this?
using in multiple places, you can
Yeah.
use a class name for that. But now your question is, how can I add a class name to my host? Uh, and that's where Angular provides a host option on your component where you can just add this class name.
Oh, so you still would add the class names, but like, okay, let's go for like even this, which is uh, this is just filling the remaining space, so it's a flex thing as well for this. But
Yeah,
like,
that is a
so forget
flex
about the
thing.
wrapper side of things. Like, are you saying that you don't want to use classes at all in your HTML?
Rarely. I sometimes use classes when I have a couple of elements in a component or in my application that I want to format differently. And usually I use a utility class, but quite often I make sure that my basic formatting is on my HTML. My basic HTML, if I put in everything there, it should look as I want. And then I only style the exceptions that are not my basic stuff. So if I get run in a page and I need and overall I have 2 columns, but I need a part with 3 columns in there, I put the 3 columns or in the styling of that component,
So
or
you
I
would put
might
it
ask.
in the. So you'd be fine with. I mean, other than the fact that. Yeah, like so something like this where like I want to change the width specific for this thing, you would be fine with in this component styles setting these values based off of like.
In a component like this, I would have I would start off without the wrapper you started with, and I would do the styling for the wrapper in the host thing there. Then I would have a header, a main, and a footer, the HTML elements, and I would format them in the styling.
Yeah, but like so you would do like
Yeah,
header, you take out this ID, that would not be needed, and then in here it would just be header,
header.
right?
Yeah,
Okay, that makes sense.
and
Yeah,
and I would do the same
what
for
were
the
you gonna say?
footer, and I would do the same for the main, and those are just available HTML. And then you're not creating a boatload of divs that have no. A div has no semantic meaning.
Yep.
If I'm looking into a page and I'm seeing div, then I don't know anything. If I look in a page and I see a header, I think, hey, this is probably a header. Is it inside of a panel? It's probably the header for the panel. Is it inside the whole page? It's probably the header for the whole page. It makes sense for debugging. And it makes also sense for screen readers and things like that. It makes sense for, it's called semantic HTML.
No, I like that a lot. And it's definitely true that I've gotten in the habit, probably, I'm guessing, like many other web developers, to not...
I have seen this. Yeah. We have a name for this. It's called divitis. It's an illness. And you can be cured.
Yeah.
But
Fair enough.
I'm just joking. But we see this. I see this a lot where I only see divs, and I go like, "Why? I have a layout right. Probably that needs to be an aside and not a layout right. And the aside might be the right. It might be left. That is." You can have a class name for that if you like. Then you have an aside and class name right. Then you know, oh, it's probably an aside on the right. But quite often that is not important where it is. You just need to know that this is an aside. This is a separate part or a navigation. We have a nav tag. Nobody ever uses the nav tag. But if you put a nav tag, then if you're eyeballing the page, you see, nav. Oh, this is the navigation. Ta-da! You don't have to think about it. You just can read it from the page. You don't have to get all of the context that you need to build to understand the page. You can just look and see, this is what is going on. And it makes reasoning about a page so much easier. Oh, I got company here.
Yeah, we're getting. Oh, look at that cat! Hello, what's this cat's name?
This is Thomas.
Oh, Thomas, how are you doing?
Thomas.
So we're getting near the end of our time, and I think we actually covered the bulk of what I wanted to. And besides the CSS architecture, the idea of using props, learning a lot of the new features that are available within CSS. Sort of a reminder to use semantic HTML, the extra added tip, making sure you use host elements instead of extra wrappers and all that stuff. Great, hugely valuable tips. Definitely helps. Is there something that we missed or didn't talk about that you think is important in the context of this space?
I think we should talk about KISS a little bit. Because KISS, keep it super simple.
Oh, KISS. Yes.
Because I see a boatload of developers making things way more complex than they need to be. And they are building hundreds or thousands of lines of JavaScript for something that can be done with 2 lines of CSS. Know your tools. Read in on CSS every now and then. Read in on HTML every now and then. I don't say you have to spend hours and hours on this every month. Perhaps in the beginning you should, but keep tabs on those things. As I said, you can now have like a positioning tooltip with no code whatsoever. CSS code and a little bit of HTML, and it works like a charm. Only in Safari it's not entirely landed, but it should be soon. So, and there are many things like that. The dialog element, it's available in HTML. It has its own top layer. The browser now has its own top layer. So basically, the top layer means it's on top of everything. No matter what the Z indexes are in the page, this thing will be on top of that. And it has a backdrop, and you can style that backdrop. So the backdrop is after the top layer, but before the rest of your page. Always. And you don't have to write a single line of code for that.
So what is the best resource you think? So, because I feel overwhelmed, and I'm sure a lot of people do when jumping into this level of stuff. My comfort zone is in JavaScript. Angular is in the sort of
the same goes for me.
Side of things.
I I like to learn stuff, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty much done learning JavaScript. I think by now, I think I've mastered that. I will not say I'm a master in JavaScript, but I know enough to get things going in there. I don't feel I'm there on the CSS level, so I'm still learning CSS.
Well, and so for me, the key thing is a resource. Like, so obviously you can read through features for CSS and you should read through Open Pops and watch that video that's on their site and whatever. So for sure. But like, in ideal case, the thing I didn't necessarily find that maybe you have a good idea of where to find this is like, I love somebody who like either blog posts or someone, a resource or something that is just like, okay, here's a breakdown of modern CSS and modern design, the way that
there are
it should
actually
be.
loads and loads of resources on those available, but you need to look outside of your JavaScript bubble and look inside of the designer bubble or the HTML bubble. There are a couple of names. I will provide you with a couple of links later on because I never know those things out on the top of my head. But there are quite a couple of people you can follow for CSS things that I go like. I have a couple of people I follow purely for CSS, and then I look at what they make, and I go, "This is amazing. I'm never going to use this, but it is amazing." And then I know that it is available, and if I need something similar, I think, "Oh, I know this can be done because I've seen it." And then you figure out how to do it. It's just basically the same thing we do with JavaScript. If you know that it is possible, you can reproduce. If you don't know it's
Exactly.
possible,
Yeah. That is what's most helpful for me is when I see someone who's done it like the right way,
yeah,
and you're just like, okay, I like exactly what you did. I'm gonna like kind of duplicate it and tweak it or whatever. Like that is by far the easiest way that I've found to learn myself and I kind of understand some of these patterns.
yeah, and there are boatloads of code for JavaScript heavy developers. We have StackBlitz. For designers, we have CodePen. Go look at CodePen. There are many samples there, and a boatload of there will never be applicable to what you're doing, but it gives you a good sense of what is possible. There are people that are drawing entire art things with one span and a megabyte of CSS, and they are creating real beautiful art out of that. And yeah, that is their pastime. It will never be mine because I'm not that patient. But knowing that it is possible enables me to, hey, okay, if I need something like that, I know where to start looking. And for me, it is, okay, I need to do something in UX. And the first thing I'm going to look at, okay, is there an HTML thing that is going to provide this? No. Is there a CSS thing that is going to provide this? No. Okay, I need to build something with JavaScript.
Actually, that's a great tip to end on there of like your approach that because there's stuff that's built straight into HTML and like I think a lot of people, myself included, bypass that even that initial thing. Start there, CSS, and then JavaScript. Like it's too fast. People go too fast to trying to program everything in JavaScript code. So like, if nothing else, in this entire episode, if people want to get out, like that one tip is probably one of the best ones. I would agree. So,
Yeah,
Sandra, thank you for joining me today. I really
you're welcome.
appreciate it. Like, I value a lot of your opinions, a lot of stuff that I'm not aware of, and helps other people. So, thank you for everything today and for everything you do for the community.
You're welcome. And I'm glad I'm be
Cool.
able to do that.
So that's it for today for Tech Time today. We'll see you again next time. See ya.
Bye.